Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I am Theo Nasser. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Right Hand Cybersecurity. I am very pleased to be joined today by Struan Todd, the co-founder of Pandamatics Underwriting, a cyber insurance cover holder in Asia Pacific. I'm really excited about today's session with Struan. We're going to be diving into a topic that is both significantly growing in relevance and also adoption. And that is the topics of covering the basics of cybersecurity insurance. Now, for our audience here today, if this is your first webinar with us, if you do have any questions, we absolutely welcome those. There is a Q&A tab on your Zoom. It should be at the bottom or on the top, wherever that's located on your browser, on your monitor of your screen. Please go ahead and type in your question directly in there. I will do my best as today's moderator to try to sort through as many of those questions as we can. Okay, so without further ado, we will officially kick this off. I'll stop sharing my starting soon screen because we have officially begun. Struan, welcome. I'd like to introduce you. Maybe just to kick things off, Struan, it would be fantastic if you could just share maybe a little bit about your background in cyber insurance.
Happily. Thank you very much for having me, Theo. So my industry experience is insurance across the board, not just cyber insurance. And I began my career in the Australian market before shifting across to London. So I learned kind of what it looks like in local markets before shifting and learning exactly what the Lloyd's insurance market could do on a global basis. Part of my role when I joined a brokerage in London called Howden was to learn about cybersecurity and insurance in Israel, take that across and then start selling cyber insurance and assisting with cyber risk to all the portfolios of clients that Howden held everywhere around the world. Following that, I shifted across to Singapore and Hong Kong to begin Pandamatics Underwriting. So the reason we set up Pandamatics Underwriting was to provide cyber insurance in a different manner to what the existing insurers did and try and make it easily understood by clients, but bring additional value to those businesses in the sense of pre-breach services, clear explanation of what their coverage included, and then also discounted access to other tech tools to ensure that they were quite safe and sustainable.
Awesome, Struan. Thank you. Now, for today's conversation, what we want to do for our guests here is we want to start just fundamentally on the basics of what is cyber insurance, how does it work, who is it suited for. So the way that I'm going to formulate this first question, when people think of insurance, what probably comes to most people's minds first is insurance for their lifestyles, right? Whether it's insurance for their home, it could be insurance, disaster insurance, it could be health insurance, car insurance, insurance for belongings. As we look at insurance for a business now, specifically for cybersecurity, can you maybe just start by painting the picture around what is cybersecurity insurance? What does it entail and why is it needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So cyber insurance falls to what we would refer to as commercial insurance for the most part. So it's not something that you necessarily go on and buy insurance for your car or for travel or for those kind of purposes, not for the individual, but it's for businesses. So typically over the last, 20 to 30 years, businesses had typically gone, I need professional indemnity insurance to cover me for liabilities of what I do. I need general liability so that if anyone hurts themselves or I get something wrong, all of that, then that kind of falls into that space. And things such as directors and officers to protect themselves for poor decision-making processes. Now, cyber is quickly becoming or should now be a staple to what that inclusion looks like. The typical distribution is you go to your broker and say, hi, I need cyber insurance. Now, what is in that cyber insurance has changed over the years. But I suppose fundamentally the global market has determined that there are two main components. There's first-party coverage and third-party coverage. Now, first-party coverage is if there is a cyber attack or any form of breach to your network as a business, the first-party coverage is protection for the business itself. So if you walk into your office and you've had a ransomware attack that's locked everything down, you can't access your computer system, the first-party coverage will cover forensic experts coming in and ensuring that you can get back up and running as swiftly as possible. Any financial loss due to business interruption. So if you can't operate or service your clients during that period because of that attack, and any reputational damage that you also experience. So, if you suddenly had a massive cyber attack, you can't do any of that business, then your partners might sit there and go, well, we don't really trust you as a business partner anymore. So that's the main component in my mind, the most important for what cyber insurance brings. But then you also have third-party insurance. So the third-party coverage really applies to if a cyber breach to your system causes loss to someone else. So if you contain all of your client information on your system, you have a hack, all of that data is released elsewhere outside of the network, including credit card information or any personally identifiable information, and people can sue you for that. And you can also be fined for it. And obviously that happens quite a bit in various different territories all around the world. So that cyber insurance offering tries to cover both of those components, one by giving you the service and help on the first party, but also giving you the financial indemnification for that third party where you've lost money because of that scenario.
So you say cyber insurance is or should be a staple, you said, for any business, right? Are you essentially saying the use case or who cyber insurance, what type of business it would be most suited for? You're saying this goes up and down market, up and down scale, industry agnostic, right? You're looking at SMEs, mid-market to enterprise, public, private sector. Are you looking across any industry? Who is it most suited for?
Yes. So it's an easy one for me to say that is needed everywhere because, I sell cyber insurance. So let's be frank, there is a little bit of a bias there. However, I've spent my whole career in the insurance world determining what businesses need from all sorts of angles. So as a broker, as an underwriter, as a risk management advisor, I've always been looking at where businesses have gaps and how they can protect themselves successfully. Now, businesses, as I've said, have always purchased things like PI and liability because either government or regulation has said that they have to, or they've gone, well, that's an obvious purchase. Of course I need to buy that. Now, cyber's been more difficult to get to that stage because it's an intangible risk. You can't sit there and physically go, well, this is exactly the loss I'm experiencing. It's almost the idea. And the idea is that you're going to lose money at some point in time from an attack that you can't physically control. So I genuinely think that it is an exposure to every single business. Every single business that has any personally identifiable information or has anything connected to a network, there is an exposure there. Now, in saying that, I'm not saying everyone needs to go out and buy cyber insurance. I want to caveat that, so to speak, because, ultimately insurance is a risk transfer tool. So if you're comfortable with the exposure that you have in anything, you don't need to go and buy insurance for it. But realistically, cyber attacks have now become so commonplace in so many different avenues that you might not get targeted as business, but you could have a scattergun approach that still hits you as a smaller business. Now, as a larger business, is it worth taking the risk of an insurance premium compared to the well-being of your business overall? I don't think that's necessarily a risk that you should be taking on. So maybe I'm risk averse and maybe I want to spend that little bit of extra cash each year to make sure I'm protected from those kind of scenarios. But at the same time, the exposure that we're seeing in the media, the stories that we're hearing, the different cyber attacks, the fact that all the regulation is pushing in that direction of fines and punishment for loss of data, it is a staple now for all businesses in my mind.
So I'm going to try to look at this from maybe the perspective of a lot of people in our audience. Looking at the people that we had attending today's webinar, we had a lot of cybersecurity professionals, we had business owners. Now, looking at each of those lenses, cybersecurity insurance, while it's got the cybersecurity label based on what you just said around reducing business risk or business exposure, it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a cybersecurity problem or even a cybersecurity decision. Where, as you're handling these customers with your clients, where do you typically find that the decision is made to adopt cyber insurance? Is this something that a head of security or a head of technology takes to a board? Is this something that maybe the board recommends, pushes as a strategic initiative across the organization? Where are these decisions started and ultimately where are they finalized?
Yeah, so cyber insurance, again, because it operates slightly differently, you're looking at different stakeholders. I think when you're going for your standard risk profile, it's typically your CEO and CFO who are making the decisions. Now, as soon as you start talking about cyber insurance, you're always going to go to the smartest person in the room when it comes to cybersecurity. You're always going to go to a CISO. You're always going to go to a data protection officer. You're going to go to those guys and say, what do you think our exposure is? Now, in the past, there has been a stance from those professionals to say, this is my job, this is what you pay me for, I've got this covered. I've got everything I can possibly get right. We don't need whatever they're trying to sell us. Now, as we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years, cyber breaches have hit all scales of business in every different shape or form. And it doesn't matter how fantastic or how large the expenditure is on cybersecurity, you can still have a breach. So the argument has always been that those individuals need to sit there and go, okay, I know that I'm one of the best in the world at my job, but it's still nice to have a safety net if I get something wrong or something slips through the cracks through one of our employees that wasn't my fault. So ultimately, that conversation is driven by a CISO or a DPO. But CEOs and CFOs need to be more aware that, cyber attacks are now a part of life, and your other insurance policies don't pick up those coverages that you really need this for. I think that answers your question in the details.
It does. And it actually, I think, is a great segue into a question that just came into our Q&A chat channel here. In regards to the prevention technologies or solutions, right? You just said that maybe a security leader might say, cyber insurance isn't necessarily at the top of our priority list of what we need now because I'm placing the necessary controls to hopefully get to the point where we don't have to worry about a security incident or a significant data breach where we would even need to have a cyber insurance package or premium set up and deployed.
Yeah.
I mean, just being in the cybersecurity industry, I am familiar, and I have seen on many occasions that a lot of cyber insurance packages sometimes would bundle in some type of preventative security solution. So when you're deploying cyber insurance, maybe you're getting security and awareness training, maybe you're getting some type of secure email solution or endpoint security product, or something on that, security tech stack that helps, I think, creates a mutual advantage for all parties involved, right? If you're deploying the right security controls to reduce the likelihood of a breach, your insurance provider's happy, I would assume, right? Because less chance of a payout if an incident occurs. Obviously, the client is happy if they're preventing a breach, and then you're bringing in third-party tools and filling out a tech stack. Is that the norm today? Or is that where we're headed? Like, where do you see that in the life cycle of cyber insurance?
So let's be honest. I think cyber insurance is the last 5%. And a lot of the people who had originally been first adopters of cyber insurance were, I don't need to spend on cybersecurity. I'm just going to buy insurance and that'll cover me. So they weren't necessarily the best clients for insurers to pick up, and they weren't really taking their cyber risk seriously. Mm-hmm. So just to summarize what the insurance market really looked at for cyber, all of these insurers were like, this is blue ocean, new market for us to get into. Let's all write cyber insurance. And tons of these insurers didn't do their due diligence on what cyber risk looked like. Tons of these professionals didn't really know what cyber exposure was. And they just made quick money by getting lots of clients in, and then ended up just recently starting to pay out massive claims because we've had huge ransomware attacks, as we were talking about just before this. Now, what insurers are starting to do is going, okay, we are still insurers. Like, our job is still to be an insurance company, but we want to bring you added value to give you that added surety. So, Pandamatics Underwriting looks at it slightly differently. We give pre-breach services from our partner Black Panda to every one of our clients when they bind a policy with us. Included in that, we also do a darknet scan to make sure that there's no vulnerable information already available. Now, one of the pushes that we would love to do, and we're hoping the insurance market gets to the stage, is implements training for all the staff and says, this is how much you're doing this on a regular basis. This means we're pretty comfortable. But the best that the cyber insurance market as a whole has really got to at the moment is an expectation of a minimum standard. So it's not a written in law minimum standard, but if you went to any insurer, these are basic things that we kind of expect to be in place. And that's, we want you to have firewall, we want antivirus, we want a patching cadence that's pretty regular, we want backups, and we want multi-factor authentication. If you've got those 5 things to really begin, that's a starting point. If you don't have any of that stuff, our first port of response is go and get that, because that's far more important than us just insuring you. And if we just insured you now, we're likely to pay out a claim because you're going to have a breach. So the cyber insurance market is starting to push in that direction of realizing that there are more components that they really need to assist businesses with, rather than just going, pay me a premium, I'm not talking to you until next year, hopefully, rather than paying out claims or being their handhold as a risk management advisor.
Excellent. Now, I think for many people in our audience, when you think of cyber insurance, maybe synonymously, you start thinking about ransomware. just looking at a big attack that made a lot of news cycles across the US and really across the world, back mid 2021, the Colonial Pipeline in the US, there was a $4.4 million ransomware request, and later was attributed to a cybercrime group known as DarkSide, based on just open intelligence. If you did a quick search about the attack online, in this event, the hackers stole over 100 gigabytes of data, and they threatened the U.S. Colonial Pipeline that if this was not paid, the $4.4 million, that information that they stole would be leaked. Now, as obviously $4.4 million for any size business is a significant matter, this also made a global news cycle. In addition to the global news cycle, there was involvement across public and private sector. There were massive cybersecurity companies involved in the actual forensics and investigation of the attack itself. And based on reports that I had read, the $4.4 million was paid. Now, what I don't want to do here, Stu, is ask you anything specifically about that specific data breach or their specific setup. That's not my intent. But where I want to take this, and where I think the audience is curious, because I know this is where I'm really curious, is if you were to step into those as an SME, right? Let's just say our audience here, SME 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You've got a number of different SMEs and mid-market or even enterprise organizations. They were to put themselves in the shoes of the U.S. Colonial Pipeline, and they were to be victimized by a ransomware attack. And the fallout that came with reputational liability, right? So there's the financial liability, the reputational and brand liability. Where would cyber insurance play a role in this whole thing if anybody here were to be in their shoes?
Yeah. So I'll walk you through a Pandamatics underwriting policy just so you can go exactly how we would operate. It's not exactly the same for everyone, but this is the way that we put it together. Is if you held a policy with Pandamatics Underwriting and you had a ransomware attack, now first port of call is straight away to call our incident response line, which is handled by Black Panda. And these are forensic specialists who deal with this stuff day in, day out for all sorts of business across the APAC region. Now, these guys will give advice about how to deal with it, figure out what's been blocked off, what can be addressed, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if nothing can be done, which does happen from time to time, these guys will also negotiate on the ransomware attack for you to say, okay, well, if you really think that the only way we're going to get through this is to minimize the financial loss to us by going, okay, we'll pay this, then they'll do that negotiation on your behalf and they'll assist with getting you in a position to be able to make the payment to those individuals. Now, when it comes to what is available for us to indemnify, to pay back to the business, it gets a bit more complicated. And this is where US markets differ to Singapore, to Hong Kong, to other regions. It's because of sanctions, who you can pay in anti-terrorism, all those various different components of who can actually pay it. So we won't pay the ransom ourselves, but we will reimburse the businesses if they decide that that is the only way forward for us all to get back to where we want to be. So first and foremost is the advice from Black Panda to help you. If there is substantial business interruption loss because of that, then yes, we're picking up that loss. We'll pay you for that. And we will also pay for the experts to come out and give your message to the market. So if you need to put something on the website, if you need to put it in the newspapers, if you want anything out on media outlets, then our PR consultants, Artemis and Fleisch and Hillard, get involved in that process. And all of those costs are again borne by us. The only thing which is a little bit grey area and does depend on the territory or insurer is paying that money directly. And so we don't pay that money directly, but we would pay the ransom to you if that was the scenario that occurred.
So you're saying what cannot be done or what is typically not done is the ransomware payment done directly to the criminal adversary.
Yeah, but where can't do that themselves.
But if the victim of the ransomware attack pays, you're saying that there's a reimbursement between the transaction party of the insurance provider to their client.
As long as it goes through the claims process and we're aware of everything that's occurring, then yeah, that's the way the policy looks.
And it includes obviously we talked about the brand and reputational impact, right? So it could include costs to hiring a PR firm to help just recover.
That's completely covered under our policy. So we have a panel of experts. So we have on our panel, we've got law firms. So there's 4 main ones that we typically use. We have 2 PR consultants as well. And then we also have forensic experts and loss adjusters that all sit on the back of our panel. So as soon as there is any issue, you're not just getting support from Pandamatics, you're getting support from all of our experts. The costs are all being borne by us rather than you, because at the start of the policy period, you paid us a premium and you said, well, I'm trusting you to be my guys, that if this occurs, you're going to put out the fire or look after me. And then we will involve whoever we think needs to be involved in that process. So in that ransomware attack, those are the people we say would get involved. If you had a data breach that was loss of client information, then we would involve lawyers, because they'd be drafting letters for you to tell the regulators about what's occurred. They'd also be giving you guidance about what you really need to do to notify each of your individual clients that that's happened. Or if you were sued for it, those lawyers would also be involved to say how you could combat it and determine what our loss would be.
It's so interesting when you think about this from the perspective of just a cyber perspective, right? If the criminals know that they hack an organization that is insured, they know that the person they're hacking, the group they're hacking, the business that they're hacking, well, obviously they don't want to go through this motion of paying, getting reimbursed, dealing with the fallout. Obviously, you want to avoid this at all costs. The hacker understands that the organization that they're victimizing will get reimbursed for whatever they're paid. So essentially, from a hacker's perspective, there's almost like an insurance policy for them where they know that they're going to be paid at the end of the day.
Yes. So I've heard this story and I've heard this stance, and I think, and I could be completely wrong here, but from my experience in the market, my viewpoint is that hackers don't need to go to that level of depth to figure out who they're going for. They can just scattergun approach, hit heaps of different businesses, and it doesn't matter whether they've got insurance or don't have insurance. They're still asking for a set amount of money that in their mind that business can probably swallow. If they're going for those larger insurers, or those larger clients rather, then sure, they might go to that depth where they'll infiltrate the system, see what cyber insurance policy they have in place, and then determine what that loss looks like. But I've only anecdotally heard that story happen maybe once or twice with some seriously big businesses. And I can understand that, because some of the towers of insurance that those businesses buy are in the hundreds of millions. But your typical SME, they're not going to buy any more coverage than maybe 2 million. Sometimes you're getting to the 5 million or 10 million stage if they are really invested in that space. But our entry level for our cyber insurance is $250,000 coverage. So, there is a distinct difference between the willingness for hackers, in my mind, to go to that level of depth for a payday. I think they can do it far more easily by just going, we're going to attack everyone, and whoever we hit. Or we're just going to go for the big whale in the room and try and target them more efficiently. And then they might do exactly what you've said. Interesting.
And I think we've piqued some interest because the questions are flowing in here. I want to get to as many of these as we can in the last 5 minutes or so. The questions are fantastic. A common theme that I'm seeing is around risk quantification, and I love this topic, right? So let's continue through this journey, right? You've implemented you're in the process of implementing your cyber insurance plan as a business owner, and you're taking the steps to protect your business. But what you need to do, both as a business owner and I would assume as an insurance provider, is quantify the actual risk that your organization faces. Right? I might say that I have got these patents that I want to protect, and all of my employee data I want to obviously protect, the data of my customers I want to protect. I've gone through this exercise of identifying my crown jewels. How do you turn that or quantify that into an actual premium package? Like, how do you come to me with a quote as an insurance provider saying, based on what you have, based on the assets that you contain in your business, this is what we're going to charge you on a monthly or on an annual basis? Yeah. So to be very political in my response, I'm not going to give you a straight answer. I'll give you components of an answer that get to the answer, I suppose. In any advice on what you think you should be buying limit-wise, your broker is a key component. They're your trusted advisors that say, we think that this is what your exposure looks like. We think you need this policy. We like this insurer because their policy works well, and we like these guys for their price or coverage. So, I don't come in and advise businesses directly. I used to do that when I was a broker. My job is to sit there and analyze your business in the real depths and go, okay, I like this exposure. I think you guys handle that as well as you can. I understand what space you're in, and I think your likelihood of attack is X. And then I'll determine what price I think is relevant for the limits that you're after. So I won't give advice on what you should have.
I might stipulate that people or industry standard for businesses of your size in this segment have typically bought X or Y. So it really depends on the business's level of risk aversion ultimately. Is first party your biggest concern, or is third party your biggest concern? If you hold tons of client information, you might be far more concerned with third party. If your whole business model is completely dependent on your ability to do online sales or operate on an online system, then if you have a cyber attack, your worry is really your first party. And then you've got to determine how much money you think you'd lose every day if you were off network. So there are different...
How do we make that less subjective? So what you just said, right? You're doing this analysis on my business. And again, I'm, right-hand cybersecurity comes to you looking for this insurance package. How do you make that analysis less subjective? So as a business owner, I walk away saying, all right, I can attribute this to this dollar figure amount of money. And then leads to another question, which I think is relevant to subjectivity is, if you're going to protect me, how do you quantify the pay for a reputational or brand damage to a data breach, right? Yeah. So how do you actually say that, I was exposed in the news, companies found out about a breach that happened? How do you then quantify the cost that is associated with something?
Yeah, so when we're determining whether we want to underwrite a business, we'll look at what we think the potential probable maximum loss is. So we won't say this is the absolute maximum loss, but we'll say what's probable that you'll get hit by. So we'll take into account your revenue, and we'll take into account your number of personally identifiable information records, and we'll say, okay, if you had a substantial loss, this is the absolute max that we think it would probably hit. And in that, we'll take into account all of those risk profile questions that I mentioned before, like firewalls, antivirus, etc., and determine what I think your vulnerability of an attack is going to be. Now, of course, we've got all sorts of algorithms in the background that determine exactly what that looks like for us to quantify what kind of price we would need to quote you to make financial sense for us both. Now, to give that advice to you, if I was a broker coming in to talk to you about it, I'd say, look at your revenues. How much would you lose a day? And that's got to be number one question is, if you had a cyber attack tomorrow, how quickly would you be able to get back up and running? And if you don't think you have an answer to that, there's a huge loss in front of you. So before you're even on that insurance discussion, I'd already be saying, make sure you've got backups, make sure you've got a disaster recovery plan or an instant response plan. Make sure you know exactly what you're doing if you did have a cyber attack tomorrow and couldn't work. I think once you're getting to that level of being able to actually define what your price needs to be or how much coverage you can be, there's only guidance that a broker can give you. Ultimately, it's down to you knowing what your business revenue looks like on an average basis, what you think your overall exposure would be. And sure, part of that process is to discuss with brokers and underwriters, but it is a subjective decision. As much as I'd love to simplify it and be like, you need 2 million, it differs from business to business. And it'd be wrong of me to suggest that it is 2 million for everyone, when one business might really need 15 million because of their dependency on their systems, and one might need nothing because, 250,000 worth just because they might get a fine or they've got liabilities associated with their data.
The time here is absolutely flown by. I do want to ask you one final question, and we're looking for just a quick reply here, Stu, on this. You've got, imagine people in our audience today who joined because they're doing cyber insurance for their business, or perhaps they've recently talked to a client that said, in order for us to feel comfortable adding you to our supply chain, doing business with you, partnering with you, whatever, we want to know that you're covered and you've got a strong cyber insurance capability in place, just to make sure that we feel that we have the peace of mind if we're entering into your supply chain or partnering with you. What advice would you give to that individual on the call today as they're just contemplating or evaluating if cyber insurance is right for them? What advice would you give to them to go back and just think about with their peers and business leaders about the factors they should weigh or consider when evaluating to purchase cyber insurance?
Yeah, there's two answers here. One is government regulation and guidance from businesses. So in the UK, they changed it to, if you're going to work any government contract, you're going to need to carry a set amount of insurance for cyber. That hasn't happened in Singapore or Hong Kong yet, but it is starting to happen. So they are starting to enforce that on contracts if you're doing any work for those entities. So I'd say if you're getting to that stage, get in early. Buy a cyber insurance policy now. Don't have a claim on it for a year. Your premiums shouldn't change that much over the next couple of years because you're a good clean risk that's done really well and nothing's gone wrong. Now, sure, market forces change that, but we won't dive into that now. The second is step away and just look at what your business losses could be. So ignore your contract discussions, but think about how badly a cyber attack can affect your business. I don't want to talk about doomsday or anything like that, because I don't think that's what it is. I just think you analyze so much of your business on so many different components about cash flow or business opportunities or sales. And I don't know that often someone just steps away and goes, well, okay, what does my system actually look like? And how stuffed am I if I can't do these things that I've signed contracts to do? That just needs some brain space. And so I think you need to step away from it, take that away for a day, maybe chat with your tech guys if you're not a tech guy and say, okay, well, what's our worst case scenario? And then I'd say, go have a chat, price it up. I wouldn't wait to buy cyber insurance because, hackers aren't going to wait until your next renewal when you decide to buy cyber insurance. They might attack you tomorrow. So get moving on it relatively quickly, especially while the market's in the condition that it is.
Awesome. Stu, thank you very much. I want to thank you very much. Since we're out of time, thank you for your time today. I definitely enjoyed just learning a lot more about the cyber insurance field and just in general, how businesses or cyber leaders think and go about thinking of incorporating it into their business. So thank you very much for all your input. The time absolutely flew by. And also for our audience here, thank you guys very much for being with us today and staying till we're a couple of minutes over. We hope you did walk away and learn something about cyber insurance. And you can at least walk away with some key items or things to think about of how you can improve your cyber and overall business posture in the future. We hope to see you on another webinar in the future and have a great rest of your day. Thank you and take care.
Thank you very much for having me, Theo.
Absolutely. Take care.